A little while ago they finally added Wario Land 4 to Nintendo Switch Online, or whatever it's called, and not having played it for a while, and being a huge fan of Wario Land 3, the best game ever made, I decided to fire it up again. And let me tell you, being able to play this beloved GBA game again with the comforts of a big screen and the amazing Switch Pro controller really got me thinking. Wario Land 4 doesn't hold a candle to Wario Land 3. I'm not actually making this because I think Wario Land 4 is bad. This is specifically about the ways I think Wario Land 4 is a step down from its predecessor, and was the beginning of the series moving away from what had become its greatest strengths. I've tried my best to keep things focused and streamlined, but God only knows how that went. It also isn't a review of everything I love about Wario Land 3, or else we'll be here all day, nor is it a retrospective on the entire series. I'll just say that Wario Land 1 is a fascinating evolution of Super Mario Land 2, Wario Land 2 is a great game, but 3 improves on it in every way, and I've never played Wario Land for the Virtual Boy. And neither have you. Also, I can't speak to Wario Land Shake It because I never owned a Wii, but based on the 10 seconds of deep research I did, the art direction is genuinely amazing, the music is catchy, and it seems fun. But it still doesn't return to what made Wario Land 3 so special. In fact, by this point the series really just feels like a whole different thing, and I rarely see people group Shake It together with the others. The iconic transformations in particular are basically on life support by this point. Like I said, this isn't a video about Wario Land 4 being bad. It isn't bad. I mean, it is bad, but it's good too. I just think it's a catastrophic step down from the genius of its predecessor in nearly every way. There are a good few reasons for this, but I'll try streamlining things and sticking to 4 main points. Firstly, Wario's invulnerability and the enemy-inflicted status effects I mentioned a moment ago. Second, how treasure collecting works and how treasure is treated generally by the game. Number 3, the world design. And lastly, a bunch of random extra stuff I swept together as one point to stop the video from becoming 6 weeks long. I've listed these in order starting from most to least important, although I consider all 4 to be very important, so you can think of them all as point number 1. Also, points 1 and 2, or points 1 and 1 if you're following along, sort of blend into one another, so it's hard to avoid talking about them both at the same time. Shall we begin? Why the fuck did I say it like that? Forgive me, I'm gonna have to give kind of a summary here. Wario's signature invulnerability was established in Wario Land 2, and returned in Wario Land 3 due to it being a brilliant idea. In 2 and 3, Wario can't be killed and he has no health bar. Enemy attacks will temporarily stun him, or cause some kind of status effect that can then be used to access areas, reach items, or just interfere with what you're trying to do. It might sound like being unable to die makes the game easy and impossible to mess up, but that isn't the case at all. I feel like whenever you tell people, such as the ones in my head, that you can't die in Wario Land 3, they immediately assume that it's a game for babies who are also idiots. Obviously the game and its challenges are balanced around this idea. You'll need to obtain or avoid enemy status effects throughout various platforming puzzles, and rather than dying, typically a fail would be getting hit by an enemy and inflicted with a status effect that then means you need to retry the specific thing you're attempting from the start. This system lets the puzzle-solving aspect become the main focus rather than direct action. What do I mean by direct action? No, that's not a rhetorical question, by the way. I have no idea why I added that bit. It's not in the script. For example, the blue chest in the Forest of Fear. This one requires you to alternate between obtaining and avoiding the Zombie Wario status at different points, so I think it's a good demonstration. Zombie Wario will fall through thin platforms if he jumps on them, but once you reach the end, you actually need to become Zombie Wario in order to reach the chest itself. You also need the zombie status to bypass these, to get the key. The trick here being remembering which platform you need to fall from, as you can't see from the upper level, and these water lights will turn you back to normal and can only be bypassed as Zombie Wario from above. Another example would be the green chest in the East Crater. To reach the key, you need to become Bat Wario and avoid shafts of light, but then to reach the chest as normal Wario, you need to avoid the bats, which now become an obstacle. I don't understand. I recorded so many hours of me completing Wario Land 3 100%, and I somehow don't have footage of me opening this chest. These are far from the most complex puzzles in the world, but I'm not trying to claim you actually need a very high IQ to understand Wario Land 3. I'm just trying to demonstrate that this type of gameplay accounts for like 90% of the game. Wario Land 4, on the other hand, still features this enemy status effect system, technically. Sometimes, when it feels like it. And we'll talk more about this in part 2, but 4 is unfortunately just too high and mighty for the invincibility concept and retreats to a hit point system. Adding a health bar back to Wario Land is like adding a hunger meter to Tetris. Being able to die and get kicked out of a level doesn't make the puzzle platforming any more difficult or engaging, it's just annoying and time wasting. Although I suppose since Wario Land 4 removed so much of the actual puzzle platforming, it's less of an issue. I mean, it's a clever strategy really. By definition, you can't ruin as much of something if half of it is gone. If they added a hit point system to Wario Land 3 but changed nothing else about it, the game would be significantly worse. Unfortunately, Wario Land 4 didn't just add a hit point system and change nothing else. It added a hit point system and proceeded to fuck up everything else as well. Okay, I'm exaggerating, but still. Bosses in 4 are a good example of where having a health bar drags the game down, in my opinion. In 4, boss fights can just be an exchange of hit points, like every other game in the entire universe. You could feasibly brute force your way through these fights if you know what you're doing and want to get through them as fast as possible, and you'll be wanting to get through them as fast as possible, because holy shit, they have so much health, and these things really start to outstay their welcome. You can't do this in 3. No matter how familiar you are with a boss, if they hit you even once, you are getting ejected from the arena and have to try again. Only Beaver thing really gives you a chance to stay in the fight. It might sound easy and simple, and admittedly it can be, these fights are very basic, but it can also get surprisingly tense, especially with some, like Wolfen Boss, where you really have to plan your positioning at all times, and don't even get me started on the fucking football rabbit. I almost had an anxiety attack beating him again for this video. In 4, I often find myself getting lazy and just taking hits I could have avoided because why bother, and also I'm a bad player. It's a shame because I actually really like the bosses in 4. They're more difficult, they have cool designs, and are far more involved and complex than the bosses in 3. But I think they could potentially be even more fun if you couldn't afford to get hit once. But since I'm no game designer, I don't want to speak too definitively on it, I'll just assume I'm 200% correct. I do have to be fair and give credit where it's due, however. The Golden Diva actually has an interesting twist in that you need to get afflicted by a status effect in order to damage her. It's only a small part of the overall fight, but it's fun. Maybe this is how bosses could have worked in 4 without needing to be one-hit KOs like they are in 3. Perhaps bosses could have inflicted multiple different status effects via different attacks, some of which will get you ejected from the arena, while others are needed to damage them. This could have been a logical expansion of how bosses worked in Wario Land 3. The final boss in 3, Rudy, will literally one-hit KO Wario, and is a good example of why dying doesn't work well with that game. Rudy is the only possible way you can get a game over in Wario Land 3. To be fair, the game's hands are kind of tied due to the nature of the location you fight him in. It isn't actually a proper level. Aside from the final fight, only cutscenes ever happen here, so there isn't actually any external room for Wario to be ejected to like in normal levels, so it leaves the world map as the only option. Therefore, losing to Rudy ends up being more tedious than any other boss in the game, because you have to select the temple from the world map and sit through the cutscenes again every time you lose, and it just wastes a load of time, but it doesn't actually make the boss fight itself any harder or more interesting. And yeah, I know no one is going to be dying to Rudy over and over again, but you get my point. You do get my point. Being able to take damage and quote-unquote die also messes with how the series differentiated itself from the accursed Mario. Unlike that bastard, the noble Wario is portrayed as cartoonishly durable and able to take insane amounts of punishment like one of the Looney Tunes or something. But now in 4 he can just be injured and killed out of the level. Now he's mortal again, and it spoils the effect. The health bar was actually the change that surprised me most of all back in the day when Wario Land 4 was first released. It just feels like such a big revelation to unhave, and honestly I think it's one of the biggest missteps. Moving on to the treasure, bear with me while I give another quick overview again. I'm only doing this to frame my argument, not to turn it into a series review. Anyway, in Wario Land 3, every level contains 4 chests and their corresponding keys. You can only open one chest at a time, because opening a chest finishes the level and returns to the world map, and you must collect the right key first. Not sure why I bothered to specify that, you probably know how keys work. Both keys and chests are generally treated the same in that they all require some level of effort to reach, with keys generally being slightly simpler to reach than chests. So in practice, every level has 8 significant tasks for you to accomplish, 9 if you also go for the set of music box coins in each level. There's also an opening animation for every chest, which makes them feel even more like a significant reward when you finally do get to them, at least to me. The reason opening a chest always exits a level is because the vast majority of the time, when playing through the story, the treasure you just got will be opening up the next level or a new area of a previous level, so you'd be moving on regardless. You can't just stay with a level until you get all 4 chests and move on, because all 4 chests are never accessible all at once without future treasures making them reachable via new power-ups or level changes. The game is linear in this sense, even though you can go to any level you want at any time. Wario Land 4 parallels these collectibles quite closely, which makes it interesting to compare the two. In Wario Land 4, you have to collect 4 jewel pieces and a character called Keyser in every level. I have no idea why I'm bothering to explain all this. The only people who are ever going to watch this are people who prefer Wario Land 4 and are here to be angry at me. In my experience, you can always collect all 5 things in a single run. You don't have to, but you can. Jewel pieces are in chests, and they look cool, and Keyser is adorable. Unfortunately, that's the end of the good part. Collecting these is nowhere near as engaging or satisfying as the chests and keys in Wario Land 3. Going back to the topic of enemy-induced status effects, see, I told you we'd get back to it. God, I should have planned this out better. Wario Land 4 does still feature this mechanic, but saying it takes a back seat to the new, more action-oriented style of gameplay is the understatement of the century. It's actually hanging on to the trailer that you're towing behind you. To make sure I wouldn't misrepresent the game, I decided to keep a tally when I was replaying it for this video. I counted the number of times I was required to use some kind of enemy-induced status effect to reach either a jewel piece or Keyser. I'll cover my own arse here by saying that it's possible my numbers could be off by 1 or 2 jewel pieces here and there. They shouldn't be, but the Wario Land Marathon was wearing my brain thin by this point, and I didn't have much of a brain to begin with. 9 entire levels did not require me to make use of enemy status effects a single time for any jewel piece or Keyser, and of the levels that did, some, such as Monsoon Jungle, only required it once for a single jewel piece, meaning almost the entire Emerald Passage can be completed without engaging with this mechanic at all. Virtually half of the entire game doesn't make use of what had become the signature gameplay mechanic of the series. This wouldn't necessarily be a crime punishable by crime if it weren't for the fact that it doesn't really replace it with anything. There's less puzzle platforming and the collectibles are less interesting to grab. Most jewel pieces are just sitting out in the open in easily reachable areas. Often so reachable that you don't even need to do any reaching to get to them, you just walk forward. The big board is the worst offender by far, with all 4 jewel pieces just sitting out on the main, very empty path quite close together. And like I mentioned, I don't even think they're satisfying to collect. Unlike the chests in 3, which not only need the right key but also feature an opening animation, the jewel pieces in 4 are collected like common coins. You just walk through them and they vanish, which means they don't feel any more significant than said common coins. Apparently Wario Land 4 even required keys for these chests during development and they took it out. Why? They're barely more satisfying to collect than the big diamonds you can find hidden around and in bonus rooms, which themselves are roughly equivalent to Wario Land 3's music box coins. Don't get me wrong, I like the music box coins and I'm glad that there is a supplemental collectible, but if they were the main thing you were hunting down, the game would be a lot less satisfying. Here's an idea. Those pink puzzle rooms could reward you with a key that opens the 4 jewel piece chests, instead of just giving you another pointless diamond. That way the chests might feel more involved, and the puzzle rooms would feel less boring because it isn't just giving you a meaningless thing that you can find lying around anywhere. I'm not forgetting the CDs that you can find in 4, by the way. I love the inclusion of those, and I actually regard them as a much superior collectible to 3's music box coins. But for this section, I really only want to compare the main mandatory MacGuffins. There isn't a single level in Wario Land 3 where you can collect all 4 chests without dealing with enemy status effects or puzzle platforming in some way. And since there are 4 jewel pieces in every level in 4, that makes them equivalent to the 4 chests in each level of 3. So the fact that you can and usually do collect all 4 pieces in one go makes it even sadder that they're so mindless to grab on your one run through the level. Wario Land 4 is more inclined to use an overall level gimmick like in Domino Row or the Big Board, rather than enemy status effect gameplay, but even then, these level gimmicks are only occasional, and honestly, they aren't very good. The counter things in Big Board are just time wasters. The one at the end of the level in particular, that you need to get to the end of to continue on and grab Keyser, being the worst offender. Literally only existing to waste as much of your time as possible, because without it the run back to the start would be even easier and more mindless than usual. It's not interesting, it's just tedious, and literally designed to waste your time as the countdown ticks away, and if you roll badly enough times and die, then enjoy doing the level all over again, dickhead. The icing on the cake for the whole treasure thing is that Wario Land 3 does a much better job at showing that Wario's whole deal is riches, wanting riches, and accumulating riches. That's what made him such a fun new Mario villain when he was introduced. Bowser fights with Mario over a woman I'm not convinced is interested in either of them, but Wario turned up and just stole Mario's house. Wario Land 3 has 100 treasures in all, each one needing to be hunted down and opened. This to me isn't just filler content to make the game longer, it's massively relevant to the character and the series. Wario Land 4 also features treasure, but nowhere near as many and in a much more detached way. In 4 you get chests for defeating bosses, and how many you get depends on how quickly you beat them. These then fly vaguely into the pyramid. If they have something to do with the story and the Golden Diva, I missed it because that's how little effort the game puts into telling you they matter. This feels like that time I forgot to address a particular detail in one of my English essays and then went back and clumsily tacked the point onto the end of every paragraph hoping it would look natural. It feels so last minute and superficial, like they went, oh yeah, Wario likes treasure, and this series is about him being an anti-hero in return for said treasure, so we should probably throw some in there somewhere, especially since the player doesn't collect any in the actual levels. The jewel pieces certainly don't count, because they're just for accessing boss rooms and Wario doesn't even keep them, and the random crystals and coins, while technically a form of treasure, are so minor and incidental that they in no way constitute a suitable replacement for the chests in 3. It really feels like 4 unlearned the lesson that they learned after Wario Land 2, which had coins sitting everywhere like a Mario game. 2 did have treasure, but it was sectioned off behind a minigame rather than being front and center. 3 also has a minigame, but it actually interacts with the level and the exploration in a way that 2's minigame just doesn't. Sure, Wario Land 2's approach technically shows Wario's love of money and riches, but again, 3 took the idea to its logical conclusion and made the treasure and the acquiring of it the gameplay, instead of having said treasure be a random side detail or set dressing. I mean, Wario Land 1 does a better job than 4 of showing this aspect of his character, since that whole game is about funding the biggest house you can. Compared to the vague treasure flying into the pyramid in 4, the main treasures in Wario Land 3 are a set of music boxes. These are the treasures that tend to be guarded by bosses throughout the game, and whenever you get one, it plays part of an overall tune. When you finally get them all and go to the temple, you get to hear the complete piece as they combine to free Rudy. It's such a nice touch, and it's the icing on the... Why was I talking so much about icing and cake when I wrote this? It's the icing on the cake for making the game's most plot-significant treasures feel more special. Certainly more special than the random PNGs of treasure you see for 2 seconds after defeating a boss in 4. So pivoting violently to point number 3, we should probably talk about the world design. The world in 3 is very solid and coherent. Every level exists geographically relative to one another, and in some levels this interconnectedness is highlighted further. For example, Above the Clouds appears above the Tower of Revival on the world map, and once you enter the level, you can see that you begin above the clouds, standing on the roof of the Tower of Revival. Another example would be the very first level, Out of the Woods, turning out to be the other side of the Forest of Fear, which is one of the last levels in the game. The two even share certain design elements, such as these trees with faces. The game even has a day-night cycle, with both day and night versions of levels each being complete with different music, enemy behaviour such as different enemies being present or daytime enemies being asleep, and even mechanical differences such as tides being higher or lower. Wario Land 3 is just operating on a whole different level to Wario Land 4 when it comes to world building, in my opinion. While there's nothing inherently wrong with Wario Land 4 going for a more Crash Bandicoot Spyro style hub world, I have no problem with it in and of itself, coming as a big change right after the consistent world of 3 just doesn't do it any favours. This approach often tends, for me at least, to weaken the identity of the world within these games, because levels become unshackled from needing to make sense geographically and end up feeling like a random platter of disjointed set pieces with no relation to one another. Because that's what they are. I mean, where the hell are these places supposed to be in relation to the pyramid? What is this weird pinball dimension? Does this mean I don't enjoy the levels themselves in such situations? No, not at all. Crash Bandicoot 2 introduced this hub world style with portals to that series, and Crash Bandicoot 2 is my favourite entry, because it's the best one. But again, my point with this video is not to say that Wario Land 4 is bad because of its choices. In a vacuum, I think the game is absolutely okay. My point is, I think the choices in Wario Land 4 feel incredibly underwhelming following on from the choices of Wario Land 3, which is a shame because the Golden Pyramid is a really cool location idea and has so much potential. It's a shame only one single level is themed around it. I haven't mentioned it until now, but Wario Land 4 actually features a single level that addresses a handful of my criticisms and shows how good the game could have been. The Golden Passage, the final level in the game before the Golden Diva boss. This level does basically everything right, and it's great. It's themed around the actual Golden Pyramid itself, so it feels like a believable part of the world. It involves a decent amount of puzzling your way through and interacting with enemies, and it even does it without foregoing the new timer-style action, by having you unavoidably activate the timer right as you enter the level, requiring you to do all your puzzle platforming and treasure hunting under a time limit from the beginning. While I generally despise timers in games and prefer being allowed to mess around as much as I want, I think that Wario Land 4 should have worked this way from the very beginning. Have the timer start as soon as you enter a level, increase the time appropriately, and then, ideally with increased puzzle platforming and slightly more interesting level design, you'd have the best of both worlds. This way the game could live up to its potential much more, because as it stands, it feels like it jettisoned the gameplay that made 3 so good, while still not fully committing to the more action-oriented style it introduced. God, I'm so sick of saying action-oriented. Of course, had they done that, I'd be here complaining that Wario Land 4 ruined the series by adding a mandatory timer to the whole game. But I think we've established by now that I'm impossible to please. And now, to loosely paraphrase a wise man, my ridiculously circuitous video is 3/4 complete. Before I conclude, I want to address that pile of random shit I swept together to make an extra chapter. Firstly, the music. I'm almost certain this will be contentious, but personally, I think the soundtrack for Wario Land 4 is just plain not great. It's rarely catchy, and the entire thing feels a bit crunchy and compressed. At least to me. Especially any of tracks with those horrible vocals, I really don't like those. I'm not saying it has no good tracks, just that they're the exception rather than the rule in my opinion. Wario Land 3's music is definitely more bleepy bloopy video game style music on the surface, but it has so many incredibly catchy tracks, some of which I've been using throughout this video, and the main theme is genuinely lovely. Speaking of plot, Wario Land 3 actually has one, including characters with dialogue. Wario Land 3's story is light and relatively simple, but compared to Wario Land 4's incredibly brief slideshows at the beginning and end, it's practically the Lord of the Rings, but if Sauron was defeated by being punched in the face 4 times. In 3, Wario gets sucked into the music box, a mysterious figure says he used to look after the world before an evil wizard or something trapped him, and he wants Wario to gather the music boxes to free him. At the end, it turns out the mysterious figure is actually the villain. The people of the world tried to seal him away with the music boxes, but before he was sealed away, he turned them all into the monsters you've been encountering throughout the game. And they've been trying to stop Wario from freeing Rudy again. So it even contextualizes the enemy hostility throughout the game, and kind of implies Wario's been killing people. But still, it's a nice and sincere little plot, and much better constructed story than 4, which honestly just feels like it goes, oh, by the way, this is what the story was meant to be. In contrast, the Golden Diva is kinda just there, with no meaningful build-up at all, and sharing no dialogue or any real interaction with Wario whatsoever. Compared to the inhabitants of the music box world Wario saves and the villain he interacts with, the princess and the Golden Diva in 4 just feel so slapdash and hollow to me, which is unfortunate because the Golden Diva has such a cool design. And lastly, the time trials. Wario Land 3 has time trials that become available once you complete the game, and they're much more involved than Wario Land 4's run back to the start of the level thing. In 3's time trials, you have to grab all 4 keys and then reach any exit as fast as you can. There's no reward, to my knowledge. I can't remember, but I don't think there is. You're just competing for a personal best, but it's still more interesting than 4's time sections, because you have to think a lot harder about the optimal path. Oh wait, even more lastly, the physics. The physics in 4 are just way less fun. You can't usually knock enemies all over the place with a ground pound like you could previously, and that's just boring. Now's the part where I have the unmitigated goal to tell you that despite spending an entire video complaining about it, I'm honestly not a Wario Land 4 hater. I'm really not. It's a fun game and I genuinely enjoy it. And as I said, I'm not trying to claim that Wario Land 3 always nails everything perfectly. That's not true either. The purpose of this was mostly to finally prove those people in my head wrong. In a vacuum, I'd probably consider 4 a great game, but the problem is Wario Land 3 is a masterpiece. Wario Land 4 is just good. If 4 isn't trying to be the same type of game as 3, and I don't think it is, then that's absolutely fine. I just feel that more often than not, 4 replaces more with less and doesn't even fully commit to the gameplay style it is leaning towards. Fewer levels, somewhat more basic level design, less puzzle platforming in favour of just running from one end to the other, a random, disjointed world, unsatisfying collectibles, virtually non-existent story, rarely making use of the enemy status effect system for mandatory collectibles, and undoing one of the series' more unique and interesting mechanics in Wario's invulnerability. I just can't possibly agree that it's an improvement over Wario Land 3. One thing I really want to make sure of any videos I do is that I want to make sure I put forward any argument I'm making as best as I possibly can. That way you can go, well, I think this guy is totally wrong and stupid, but I can see he put a lot of consideration into his position, so I can at least appreciate where he's coming from, you know? I never want it to seem lazy or that I'm just going, I think such a thing is bad because of X, and therefore I'm correct and don't need to submit any evidence to back up my claim. I'm open to the possibility that I could be completely wrong. I just want to make sure I defend my positions in a way that does them justice and makes a decently entertaining video. I mean, at the end of the day, it doesn't even matter anyway, since Nintendo has long since consigned this entire series to oblivion forever. Can't let anything original or interesting get in the way of making the exact same Mario game over and over again for 40 years.